Morning in downtown Chicago began with the sharp, rhythmic click of high heels striking marble a sound, clean, precise, and cold as steel. No one in the lobby of Harbor First Bank knew that within minutes their entire system from screens to reputation would collapse in silence. She entered without a sound, carrying nothing but a brown leather bag and a calm gaze. Natalie Brooks, 42 years old, was the woman every financial newspaper had been chasing. But that morning, she came without bodyguards, without a media team, without the flash of cameras. She was just another black customer, at least in the eyes of the tellers on duty. Across the lobby, veteran clerk Karen Holt adjusted her faded blue vest, glancing at the woman approaching. A faint frown appeared not from surprise but assessment. It was the look familiar in a world where power was often judged by skin tone and designer labels. Natalie placed her ID card on the glossy counter. Her smile was soft, polite, as if this were a routine transaction. But Karen didn't even touch the card. She lifted her chin and said coldly, "We don't serve people like you here." The words dropped into the air like shards of ice. The ID was flicked off the counter, spinning through the air before clattering onto the marble floor. Every sound in the room stopped. Keyboards fell silent, conversations cut off mid-sentence. The woman said nothing. She simply looked at the card lying face down on the ground, as if her very identity had been denied. Light from the tall glass windows reflected across her face, making Natalie's dark eyes shimmer like a storm held tightly inside. Karen folded her arms, her expression a mix of disdain and triumph. "Did you not hear me?" she said louder. "I told you this area is for premium clients. Try the public branch across the street." Two employees nearby stifled laughter, pretending to shuffle papers to hide their complicity. Natalie bent down slowly. Her knee touched the cold floor, but her head didn't bow. When her hand lifted the card, her fingers trembled, not from shame, but from fury held in perfect control. She glanced at the name on it, Natalie Brooks, CEO of Brooks Capital Group, beside the bank's own logo, the very institution poised to receive billions in investment from her company. No one there knew. No one knew that in just a few minutes the fate of the entire bank would shift forever. She rose her voice, calm, so calm it made the air itself a still. "What's your name?" Karen froze. "Excuse me." Natalie tilted her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. "You said you don't serve people like me. I'd just like to know who we are so I can thank the right person later." Her tone was gentle as wind, yet cold as steel. The laughter stopped. In the corner, the aging security guard shifted uneasily. A middle-aged customer paused his typing. The silence in the room now carried weight. Karen flipped her hair and forced arrogance into her voice. "I told you already this place isn't for people like you. Don't make this difficult." Natalie placed the card back on the counter, with precise care, aligning its edge perfectly with the table's rim. Her voice dropped low, smooth and sharp. "If your system is as clean as your manners, you should find my name in it." A long pause followed. Someone cleared their throat. A young woman pretended to scroll her phone, but her fingers didn't move. The air stretched tight as a wire. In that moment, Natalie heard the echo of her past, a whisper in her mind. 20 years ago, she had heard the same words at a small bank in South Carolina, when a teller told her that balance can't be yours. Back then she had walked away. Today she chose to stand. Behind the counter, Karen crossed her arms, smirking. "Security will be here any minute," she said. "You can explain this little scam to them." Natalie gave a faint smile, thin and chilling. "No need." The system always knows how to handle itself. The sentence hung in the air like a quiet prophecy. In the far corner, a young intern named Eli Turner felt his throat go dry. He recognized that name, Brooks Capital Group, the same one printed on the partnership proposal the entire branch had been reviewing. But he said nothing. Fear kept him silent while conscience pounded in his chest. And Natalie, she stood motionless, spine, straight shoulders, steady as stone. Eyes began to turn toward her, not out of curiosity, but from something unspoken, the weight of composure. Outside, Chicago's morning light streamed through the windows, glinting off her eyes, the light of someone who knew exactly who she was, and who knew the world would soon have to relearn how to see her. A nearby employee whispered to Corin, "Are you sure she doesn't look like a fraud?" Karen snapped back, her voice sharp. "Trust me, I see this type all the time. This type." 2 words that sliced through every pretense of civility left in the room. Natalie didn't react. She looked at the large mirror behind the counter, seeing herself surrounded by judgmental faces. And then she smiled quietly, knowingly. Because she understood that history was repeating itself, but the ending would not. She hadn't come to make a transaction. She had come to test their integrity, and this bank had already failed its first test. Karen didn't know, and she didn't need to, because in just a few hours the entire Harbor First Bank system would bow before the very woman they had just humiliated. In the corner, Eli drew a deep breath, his hand gripping his tablet tightly. Reflected in the polished marble floor, he saw Natalie's silhouette, a figure he knew the world would remember. Because when the story of the $7 billion collapse was told, everyone would recall that it hadn't started with a contract. It started with one wrong look. The ID card still lay there on the cold marble floor, like evidence of a crime no one dared to name. Every gaze in the lobby was fixed on the woman standing still, saying nothing, yet somehow commanding the entire room to hold its breath. Under the reflective light of the Chicago morning, Natalie Brooks's face revealed no emotion. But deep within her eyes was a fierce kind of silence, the silence of someone who had endured too much and who now knew exactly when to let the truth speak for itself. Behind the counterbank teller, Karen Holt stood with a twisted smile, her eyes brimming with arrogance, as if she had just punished someone for stepping into a place they didn't belong. "Are you planning to stand there all day?" Karen said dryly. "If you don't leave, I'll call security." Natalie tilted her head slightly. She didn't meet Karen's contemptuous gaze. Instead, she looked down at the ID card, that small object now resembling a mirror, reflecting the entire system of prejudice. She remembered the first time she had been humiliated at a bank 20 years ago. Back then, she was just a young woman, clutching her first paycheck, being told, "You must have written the balance wrong." She had smiled a fragile, defeated smile and walked away. But this time she was no longer that girl. She was the woman who had built a financial empire from a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta. She had learned that silence isn't weakness, it's a form of control. Nearby intern Eli Turner watched the scene unfold, his heart pounding. He recognized the name on the card, Natalie Brooks. He'd seen it in countless internal emails labeled potential merger partner. But how could he speak up when his supervisor was intoxicated with a false sense of power? He could only watch and stay silent like everyone else in that room. Natalie stepped closer to the counter. Her voice was low, slow, but clear as a pin drop. "I'm not going anywhere." Karen folded her arms, mocking her. "Oh, perfect. You'll get to meet security very soon." Then she pressed a small button beneath the counter. A faint chime rang out, an internal signal for a customer incident. Instantly, several employees looked up. No one spoke, but their eyes had already passed judgment. The air changed dense, heavy, and so still that you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Natalie didn't step back. She placed both hands on the counter, gently, deliberately. Every movement was measured by her heartbeat, controlled and unnervingly calm. "You know, Karen," Natalie said softly, her tone low and steady. "Some customers don't react when they're insulted. Not because they're weak, but because they're calculating something much bigger." Karen laughed, a short, sharp laugh that sliced through the tension like a paper knife. "You think you're here to teach me a lesson? No." Natalie replied, her gaze unwavering. "I'm just observing, seeing how much you're worth." Just then, David Rowe, the branch's deputy manager, appeared. A man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, neatly pressed grey suit, walking with the confidence of someone used to giving orders. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice deep, not friendly. Karen spoke first, cutting off any chance for Natalie to respond. This customer presented a fake ID and refused to leave the premium area. "I think she's trying to access someone else's account." David turned toward Natalie, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "No greeting, no courtesy." "Ma'am, I need to verify your identity. Please hand over your ID." Natalie reached down, picked up the card, and placed it back in front of him. "You already have it." He frowned, holding the card under the light, as if his eyes alone could determine authenticity. "Brooks Capital Group," he read slowly. "You name your own company after yourself." She answered instantly, her gaze cold but bright. "No, I named my company with my own hard work." For the first time, David hesitated. Her answer was too firm, too assured to be a lie, but he quickly recovered, exhaling sharply to reclaim control. "We'll need to do further verification. Please wait here." Karen smiled, the smug grin of someone who thought she had won. She whispered just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People like her always think they're special." An older woman sitting on a nearby sofa frowned. She leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Did you hear her say people like her?" The man nodded, his eyes narrowing. The atmosphere in the lobby seemed to tilt toward Natalie. No one said a word. But no one believed Karen anymore. Natalie looked around, her gaze, moving over each face, security staff, customers. She wasn't angry, she wasn't vengeful, just quietly sad, the kind of sorrow carried by those too familiar with being doubted for simply being different. She spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Interesting, you follow every protocol except the one called respect." The words didn't need to be loud because they pierced everyone in the room. Even Eli, who had remained silent, felt his chest tighten. Moments later, 2 security guards arrived. One young, the other an older black man, around 60, named Darryl, a long-time employee. When his eyes met Natalie's, he paused. In her calm expression, he saw something familiar. The quiet strength of someone who had endured and survived in a biased world. "Is there a problem here?" Ma'am, Darryl asked gently, his tone respectful. "No," Natalie replied, "except they're evaluating me instead of their own data." David interrupted sharply. "We're following procedure. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to escort you out." This time, Natalie looked directly into his eyes. Her response was short, precise, and resonant. "And I'm following principle." In that moment, Eli felt everything slow down, not because time stopped, but because no one dared to move. Every word Natalie spoke seemed to weigh double in the thick air. A phone rang somewhere, shattering the silence. Then whispers began spreading like falling dominoes. Who is she? She looks familiar. She's right, they haven't even checked the system. Karen started to lose her composure. Her voice rose sharp and angry. That's enough, I'm the one in charge here. And I say Natalie interrupted her. Her voice light as wind, but sharp as a blade. No, Karen. Today you're not in charge of me. You're accountable to me. The words struck like thunder. Karen froze, her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling. Darrell lowered his head, hiding a faint smile, the knowing smile of a man who sensed the storm about to break. No one in that room understood that with a single thrown ID card and a few quiet sentences, a bank was about to lose something far more valuable than money, the trust of the woman who owned it. And at the center of that coming storm, Natalie Brooks stood still, the unshakable pillar of a moral reckoning, about to erupt. No one inside the lobby of Harbour First Bank realized that the woman they were doubting hadn't come to withdraw money, she had come to withdraw trust. The $7 billion merger between Brooks Capital Group and Harbour First Bank was awaiting only one signature. But that morning, Natalie Brooks wanted to verify something. No balance sheet could ever reveal the true culture of the partner she was about to empower. She sent no email in advance, brought no entourage, made no announcement of a CEO visit. She came alone with nothing but a leather bag, a folder, and the ID card that Karen Holt had just thrown to the floor. 3 months earlier, her advisors had praised Harbour First. The numbers are flawless, the process transparent, the leadership impeccable. But Natalie, who had once built her first business from a tiny apartment in Atlanta, knew that numbers never told the whole story. A company could score perfectly in finance, yet be bankrupt in dignity. So she chose the only way to see the truth by going undercover. She had once told her assistant Amira during a private meeting, "I don't need them to tell me how much they respect customers. I want to see how they treat someone they think doesn't deserve respect." And that was how this morning began a simple experiment, but a brutal one. The air in the bank was tight as a drawn string. David Rowe, the branch's deputy director, tried to appear in control, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Behind him, Karen Holt's voice had grown small, her arrogance beginning to crack. Natalie stood still, one hand resting lightly on the counter. No one knew what was inside her briefcase, a merger agreement embossed with the words, "Confidential, $7 billion merger signing pending." If the morning had gone normally, she would have signed it. But within 10 minutes, nothing was normal anymore. In the corner, young intern Eli Turner was battling his conscience. He remembered the internal memo from the previous week, titled Brooks Capital Group, Executive Visit Pending Confirmation. He looked at the woman standing before him, her eyes cold yet clear, her voice calm yet commanding. Everything about her radiated the quiet authority of someone who had long been making the final call, the kind of power that never needed to shout. Eli wanted to speak the truth. But when Karen's warning gaze flicked his way, sharp and threatening, he swallowed his words. If I speak, I lose my job. If I stay silent, I lose my conscience. The thought made his hands tremble as he instinctively opened the bank's internal app on his tablet. The name Natalie Brooks appeared. Account verification confirmed. Position Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Group. The notification glowed on the screen like a secret too heavy to hold. Eli swallowed hard, looked up, then quietly closed the device. Across the counter, Karen was still trying to salvage her image. "Who do you think you are to challenge me here? This is the largest bank in Chicago, not a stage for your performance." Natalie smiled, and that smile froze Karen in place. "Oh, I'm not performing. I'm simply observing your performance." Her voice carried evenly, not loud, not soft, yet cutting straight through the silence. The entire lobby went still. Then a middle-aged man sitting near the reception desk, silver-haired and dressed in a grey suit, spoke up slowly. "Excuse me, but that employee should watch her words. I've been here since the start, and this woman hasn't done a single thing wrong." Karen turned sharply, snapping, "You don't understand what's happening here. This is—" "No." Natalie interrupted, "He understands. Because sometimes outsiders see more clearly than those trapped inside the system." Her words made David, who was still standing beside the counter, turn to look at her. There was something in Natalie's eyes that made him hesitate, a stillness too confident, as if she knew exactly who he was and already knew how this would end. The air grew heavier. Outside the glass doors the city buzzed on, but inside every sound seemed to vanish. Natalie took a slow breath and spoke clearly. "I didn't come here to withdraw money. I came to withdraw a conclusion." Karen laughed, her voice dripping with disdain. "A conclusion? Who do you think you are?" "Someone you'll remember for the rest of your life," Natalie said softly, her tone low and rumbling like distant thunder. Eli's skin prickled. He had never heard anyone speak words that sounded both quiet and crushing. David Rowe cleared his throat, desperate to reclaim authority. "Ma'am, if you have an issue, we can schedule another appointment. But right now you're disrupting branch operations." Natalie turned toward him, unblinking. "I'm not disrupting anything. I'm observing your process, how you handle misconduct, how you protect this institution's dignity, and I'm documenting every detail." "Documenting?" Karen sneered. "Documenting what? How you just threw away a $7 billion deal with one wrong look." No one moved. The words fell like a stone into a still lake, sending ripples through every person present. Eli nearly dropped his tablet. David whipped around. Karen froze, her face drained of color. "What did you just say?" David stammered. "I said," Natalie stepped forward, her voice steady and resonant, "I came this morning to see if this bank deserves to be called a partner. And unfortunately, you've just answered that question yourselves." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Eli glanced at his tablet again and saw the line, "Brooks Capital Group, Executive Verification active," glowing on the screen. His hands shook. He knew every word she said was true. David clung to the last shred of authority. We'll need to confirm this with upper management." "Upper management?" Natalie smiled faintly. "I'm afraid your upper management is standing right in front of you." The air vanished from the room. Karen took half a step back. Eli barely breathed. Darryl, the veteran security guard, looked at Natalie with a subtle spark in his eyes, not surprise, but pride. Natalie didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke each word, dropping like steel onto the cold marble floor. "I give trust through action, not contracts, and this morning the trust has been returned without mercy." A light gust drifted through the revolving doors, carrying a trace of Chicago's autumn chill. Someone laughed outside on the street, but inside no one moved. Even Karen, who once believed she held the power, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Natalie glanced at her watch. It was time for Harbour First's executive board meeting, the one where she had been scheduled to sign the deal. She looked at Karen, her tone almost like a message. The biggest deals don't always need signatures. Sometimes people destroy them themselves with their own attitude. Then she turned and walked away, leaving behind a cold counter and a room full of stunned faces. No one yet knew that within a few hours, headlines would flood the business networks. Harbor First loses $7 billion deal over discrimination, and it all began with an ID card thrown to the floor. The bank now felt like a stage where everyone had been forced into a role, only no one realized the play they were performing could bring the whole system down. After Natalie Brooks spoke her final line, the air seemed to stop moving. A few employees tried to keep working, tapping their keyboards for show, but their fingers trembled. No one wanted to be the first to say anything more. They could all feel it, something enormous was coming. Karen Holt still stood there, lips stretched into a stiff, forced smile. She could not believe that a woman in a white shirt and flats could shake her. Her arrogant ego screamed, "No, she is only bluffing, it is just a clever trick." She straightened her vest, tried to recover her poise, and whispered to David Rowe, the deputy branch manager, with quiet certainty, "I have seen this type before they come to make trouble. It is best to throw her out now." David nodded slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on Natalie, the woman standing motionless with both hands resting lightly on the counter. No resistance, no struggle, only the sense that she was recording their every detail. His voice rose steady and professional. "Ms. Brooks, I am afraid you are disrupting our operations. If you do not leave, I will have to ask security to intervene." Every eye in the bank turned to Natalie. She did not react immediately. Instead, she looked around, taking in each face, each employee standing there, each customer watching. When her voice came, it was as soft as a breath, yet each word sliced through the space like a fine blade. "The only disruption here is the way you judge a person before you have even read their name." Karen laughed, a shrill sound that bounced around the lobby. "Goodness, are you planning to turn this into a moral forum? You are in a bank, not a church." Rather than rattling Natalie, the line darkened her gaze, and that look made Karen instinctively step back half a pace. "I know exactly where I am," Natalie said slowly, "and that is exactly why I am disappointed. A place that moves billions of dollars every day, yet is not rich enough to hold a little respect." As she finished, a soft ding sounded, and the glass doors slid open. 2 security guards walked in. The younger one moved first, his face tense. The other, older, black calm in his stride. Darryl. Darryl approached, his eyes settling on Natalie. In a heartbeat, he understood, not because of her reputation, but because he recognized that composure, the kind carried by those who have lived through prejudice and chosen not to let it break them. David gestured, his voice firm. "Please assist in escorting this guest out. She is refusing to cooperate." The order rang out, clear and final, but no one moved. The younger guard glanced at Darryl, waiting for a cue. Darryl drew a breath and spoke quietly, respectful. "I am sorry, Mom. Would you like to explain this before we have to do anything?" Natalie turned to him, offering the faintest, saddest smile. "There is no need. You are just doing your job, and this system, it will take care of the rest." David frowned. "Are you threatening us?" "No," she said, eyes never leaving his. "I am warning you." In that moment, intern Eli Turner opened his tablet again. The verification line on the internal system still glowed there, bright as a beacon. "Natalie Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Group." His heart pounded. Sweat gathered at his temples. He looked around. Someone had to know this. But Karen, David, all of them were drowning in blind confidence. Eli was about to speak when Karen's icy stare cut across the room. "Eli," she said softly, like an order, "be quiet. Do not interfere." He lowered his head, but his hand trembled over the screen. He knew that with one more tap, the whole truth would be visible. But in this room, the truth was being smothered by fear and hierarchy. Natalie tapped a finger on the counter, slow and steady. Each soft knock seemed to sharpen Karen's irritation. "What are you doing?" Karen snapped. "Taking notes," Natalie said. "Notes of what history?" 4 words, short and spare, and the air dropped to freezing. Then the back door opened again. A tall man in a black suit with a silver tie pin strode in with assured authority. Richard Hayes, the branch manager. Each step landed like a declaration of power. He swept his gaze over the scene guards, standing still, employees, clustering customers, staring. "What is happening here?" he said, his voice heavy with authority. Karen stepped forward at once, clinging to him like a life raft. "Mr. Hayes," this guest presented a fake ID and caused a disturbance. "I asked her to leave, but she refused." Richard nodded, turned to Natalie, and spoke in a low, cold tone. "If you do not leave this facility immediately, we will have to call the police." Natalie looked at him, her smile thin as a blade. "The police, or would you rather call your superiors?" The question drew his brow into a frown. "Do you know who I am, I do?" she answered gently. "And that is why I am here." No one understood that line, but everyone felt it. The power in this room was slipping out of his hands. Karen tried to rescue the moment. "She claims to be with Brooks Capital. It is obviously a fake. I already told you." "Wait," Natalie cut in. "You said I claimed that." "I never said it. You assumed I was fake before you ever checked." The words landed, and Eli Turner could not hold back any longer. He opened his tablet and spoke, voice shaking but clear. "She is telling the truth." Every head swung toward him. Karen barked, "Eli, what do you think you are doing? I am just telling the truth." He swallowed. "The system clearly states she is the chief executive officer of Brooks Capital." Richard Hayes jolted. What Eli turned the screen around. The verification line shone in the reflection. Identity verified Natalie Brooks. The space fell deathly still. All that remained was the sound of hearts pounding and shallow breaths. Karen went pale. David stepped back half a pace. Darrell, the older guard, allowed himself a quiet smile. The smile of someone who has waited many years to see justice circle back. Natalie looked around. She did not gloat. There was only a strange calm, the calm of someone who had seen exactly what she came to see. "Now then," she said, voice light as silk, yet ringing like a command, "shall we begin to have a real conversation?" No one answered. Because in that instant, everyone understood that this confrontation was no longer between one woman and one bank employee. It was a collision between real power and imagined power, between people who only hold a seat and the person who actually builds the chair. And from that second on, nothing inside Harbour First Bank would ever be the same again. The bank shattered into silence. Every gaze turned toward the woman who had just shaken an entire system with a single sentence. The words, "Identity verified. Natalie Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Group," still glowed brightly on the screen. It was like a spotlight exposing those who had long lived in the shadow of prejudice. Karen Holt stood frozen, her lips trembling, but soundless, the red lipstick now smeared like a mark of shame. David Rowe, who once believed he was in control, stood blank-eyed, still clutching the ID card he had been about to confiscate. No one in the lobby spoke a word. They didn't have to. The truth was speaking for itself. Natalie Brooks looked at them, not with contempt, but with the gaze of someone who had just lost her last piece of faith. She could see every face clearly fear, confusion, avoidance. She saw the silence of the bystanders too, the silence that always aids injustice. "Here's the thing," she said, her voice calm enough to chill the air you can check again. "But do it by protocol, not by prejudice." Her words were like a mirror held up to the entire branch. Richard Hayes, the branch manager, tried to recover his authority. He stepped forward, voice low and stiff, masking the tremor in his tone. "Ms. Brooks, I understand this is a misunderstanding. If you truly are who you say you are, then surely a misunderstanding." Natalie interrupted, her eyes sharp as a blade. A misunderstanding performed by 3 people at once. A misunderstanding encouraged by laughter, by silence, pretending not to see. She took a step toward the counter, and every footstep felt like the pulse of the entire room. "No, Mr. Hayes. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is culture, and today your culture has been exposed." Karen stepped back. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. The word CEO dried her throat like sand. In her mind, a voice whispered, "No, it can't be. A woman like her can't be a CIO." But there was no room left for denial. Then Karen did the most foolish thing anyone could do when standing before real power. She tried to regain control through defiance. "You have no proof you're the investor." She screamed like an animal cornered. "I don't believe any of this." Before anyone could stop her, she snatched the ID card from David's hand, and to the horror of everyone watching, threw it to the floor again. The small card spun through the air and landed on the marble with a cold, echoing click. The sound rippled through the lobby like a verdict being declared for the second time. No one breathed. Even Darryl, the older security guard, closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had just witnessed a sin that could not be forgiven. Karen's voice trembled, but she forced it out. "There, I warned you. Fraudulent activity results in confiscation. It's procedure." An elderly woman sitting by the door spoke up sharply. "What kind of procedure insults people like that?" A young man raised his phone, recording the entire scene. "Go on," he said quietly. "Let the world see how they handle procedure." Richard Hayes raised his voice, snapping, "Enough, Holt, stop this now." But it was too late. Natalie didn't bend down. She looked at the card on the floor, then raised her eyes. In them was no anger, no pain, only a dangerous stillness, the kind that comes before a storm. "Are you sure about that, Karen?" she asked, her voice low. "You really want to do this in front of everyone, filming?" Karen clenched her fists, chin raised. "You can't scare me." "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you," Natalie replied softly. "I'm simply confirming that you've just signed your own sentence." She leaned down, not to pick up the card, but to take out her phone. She swiped the screen once and pressed a contact, Amira Stone. The lobby fell silent. A faint beep echoed through the air. Amira, Natalie said evenly, "Activate Protocol 7. On the other end, a woman's voice came through clear and certain. "Confirmed. Executing now." Richard frowned. "What did you just do?" Natalie didn't look at him. She stared at her phone's reflection, her voice calm and cold. "I just asked the system to do what your people forgot. Verify." Eli Turner glanced down at his tablet, and his eyes widened. The screen began flashing. A red warning line appeared. "Brooks Capital System. Linked executive verification in progress. "Oh my God," Eli whispered. Other employees rushed over watching as the system flickered wildly. Then the large monitor behind the counter, the one displaying account data, shifted color. Every open window closed at once, replaced by a single glowing line of text in bright gold: ownership verification, Brooks Capital Group. The typing stopped. The breaths quickened. Someone in the lobby whispered, "My God." She wasn't lying. Richard Hayes went pale. He stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "You can't do this. You have no authority. No authority." Natalie lifted her head, her eyes sharp as steel. "You're standing in a branch, owned by me as the principal shareholder. I have full authority." There was nothing left to say. Karen stumbled back, her voice, small, shaking. Who are you really?" Natalie looked at her. Not angry, not proud, only with the expression of someone who had watched arrogance destroy itself too many times. "I'm the woman you dismissed, and the one you just helped save $7 billion because now I know I can never partner with people like you." The words struck the marble like a hammer. Karen collapsed into a chair, her face ghostly white. Richard took a step back. Eli looked at Natalie, and for the first time, he understood what real power looked like. It didn't need to shout. It didn't need to prove itself. It only needed to stand firm. Natalie bent down, picked up her ID card, brushed off the dust with deliberate care, and whispered softly, almost to herself, "Dignity like this card can be thrown to the floor. But not everyone has the strength to pick it up and still hold their head high." The entire room stayed silent. And in that silence, power had changed hands. The air inside the Harbour First Bank lobby grew dense, as if every breath carried traces of metal dust. Everyone stood frozen, except for the light. It was the only thing still moving, flickering across the flashing screens. Eli Turner was the first to notice that something was changing. The tablet in his hands lit up lines of system code scrolling like a storm. A notification appeared. Executive verification. Brooks Capital System. Linked. He inhaled sharply. Oh my God. The whisper was small, but enough to make nearby employees turn their heads. They saw his eyes locked on the screen, his trembling hands. At that same moment, every computer in the branch began beeping soft, mechanical, relentless. Each device displayed the same message: Protocol 7 activated ownership verification, in progress. The bank, a place defined by order and control, had turned upside down. Those who once held power no longer understood what was happening, while the woman they had dismissed stood calmly watching the scene unfold, like a play she herself had written. Natalie Brooks set her phone down and clasped her hands together. Her voice was light as air, yet carried across the entire room. "There's no need for anyone to shout. The system will do what people have refused to do: verify the truth." Karen Holt stood in shock. She looked around, searching for agreement from her colleagues, but found only averted eyes. David Rowe tried to sound composed, though his breath came shorter each second. "Ms. Brooks, you can't activate our internal system. That level of access is restricted to Natalie," cut in her tone, calm but sharp enough to slice through the air. "To the principal shareholder. And that's me." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Soft conversations collided with the buzzing of phones as alerts poured in from headquarters. Security alert, executive verification underway. All branches on standby. Richard Hayes, the branch manager, had turned pale. He tried to sound firm. "This is unauthorized interference. I'm calling the regional director." Natalie raised an eyebrow, her smile faint. "Go ahead. Their line is already connected to me." The sentence hit him like a slap. Richard's eyes darted around the room, seeking help, but no one moved. All eyes were locked on the screens, which were glowing brighter now. A cool blue light, soft yet chilling, like the glow of justice breaking through the walls of arrogance. Then the speakers overhead came alive, the robotic voice of the bank's internal AI echoing through the space. "Verification in progress. Please remain calm. Unauthorized personnel will be logged." Several employees panicked and shut their laptops. Karen stumbled back, her voice shaking. How are you doing this?" Natalie didn't answer right away. She walked slowly around the counter, her eyes passing over each face, as if reading lines of living data. "I didn't do anything, Karen," she said quietly. "I just entered the right command. The system is simply reflecting your actions." Her gaze stopped on David. He pressed his lips together and lowered his head, trying to hide from her eyes. At that moment, a soft ding echoed. The large monitor on the wall switched displays. The Harbour First logo disappeared, replaced by a golden emblem, Brooks Capital Executive Network. Below it, lines of text began to appear crisp and undeniable. Audit initiated. All interactions under review. Branch behavior, log active. The entire branch froze. Every word, every gesture, every condescending glance from the last 30 minutes was now being archived into the bank's central database. Karen shouted, her composure breaking. "You're not allowed to record video here." "I'm not recording," Natalie replied evenly. "Your system is." The murmur spread like a current. A young employee whispered, "Oh my God, she has direct access. She really is the investor." Natalie ignored the noise. Her eyes stayed on the screen, its blue light reflected in them. Her voice was slow, steady, and filled the room. Technology doesn't lie. It doesn't fake a smile. It doesn't judge people by skin color or voice. It knows only one thing, the truth. Richard swallowed hard. He knew then no excuse would matter. Justice had gone digital, and he was now being judged by the very system he managed. Outside the glass doors, rain began to fall. Each drop tapped against the glass like a countdown to the collapse about to come. Darryl, the older security guard, looked at Natalie quietly. He took a step forward and said softly, "I've worked here 28 years. I've never seen the system react like this. Honestly, thank you for making it do what it was meant to do." Natalie gave a small nod. She said nothing, only smiled a rare smile, not of pride, but of empathy. Then on the large monitor, the final line appeared, a sentence that would forever be etched in the memories of everyone there. Identity verified, Natalie Brooks. Chief Executive Officer, Brooks Capital Group. Major stakeholder, Harbour First Bank. A confirmation tone followed a single chime, but it sounded like a gavel striking in a courtroom. Eli Turner closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew this moment would spread across social media, becoming a symbol not just of discrimination, but of the power of truth. Karen collapsed into a chair, her strength gone. She whispered in despair, I didn't know. I didn't know who you were." Natalie looked down at her, her voice soft but firm as ever. "That's the frightening part, Karen. You shouldn't need to know who I am to know how to behave." Silence. A silence so thick it seemed to have weight and shape. No one dared breathe too loudly. Then Natalie turned to Richard Hayes, who now stood with his head bowed like a reprimanded student. "Mr. Hayes," she said slowly, "I came here to sign a $7 billion contract. But now I have another word to write instead. Cancel." The word fell like a blade. Richard stared at her, his face drained of color. You can't do that over a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Natalie interrupted. "It's a mirror, and it reflects exactly what you are." She stepped back, her eyes sweeping across the lobby where everyone still stood frozen. "I don't need to raise my voice for anyone to believe me, because today your system has spoken for me." Then she turned and walked away from the counter. The sound of her heels echoed evenly through the air between heavy breaths and the patter of rain. On the large screen, the final line appeared: "Audit-logged behavioral report sent to Executive Board." There was nothing left to say. No police needed. No argument required. Justice had its own record now. And as Natalie stepped through the doors, Darryl bowed his head, not out of duty, but out of respect. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. The final beeps of the system faded into silence, leaving behind a stillness so heavy it seemed alive. On the large screen, the logo of Brooks Capital Group glowed like a cold moon. Beneath it, golden letters flashed steadily: "Executive Audit Initiated All Branch." Footage logged. Harbour First Bank, once a symbol of prestige and financial authority, had just turned into the stage of a moral reckoning. Karen Holt collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling. No shade of lipstick could now hide the panic etched across her face. Every smirk, every dismissive word from minutes earlier, stabbed back at her like needles. "I didn't mean to," she stammered, voice cracking. "I just thought she was impersonating someone." No one replied. No one wanted to share her burden. David Rowe, the deputy branch manager, stood behind the counter, his face drained of color. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, the crooked tie, the sweat-soaked forehead, the eyes of a man who had just lost his career to one moment of misplaced silence. Richard Hayes, the branch manager, tried desperately to hold on to whatever authority he had left. "Miss Brooks," his voice was hoarse, We're deeply sorry. This was just a mistake, an act of poor judgment by my staff. I assure you our branch will take full responsibility." Natalie turned back toward him, her expression calm. But that calmness frightened him more than anger ever could. "Responsibility?" she said softly. "Responsibility doesn't only belong to those who act, but also to those who stand by and watch." Her words swept through the room like a gust of cold wind. Several employees lowered their heads, their hands clasped together, because they knew she was talking to them, the ones who saw everything and stayed silent. Eli Turner, the young intern, couldn't hold it in any longer. He stepped forward, his voice shaking but firm. "Ms. Brooks, I knew from the start. I saw your name in the system. But I was afraid of losing my job." Natalie looked at him, her expression softening into a faint smile. "It's all right, Eli. Today everyone lost something. Some lost their jobs, some lost their trust, and some lost themselves." She paused, her voice deep and steady. "But you just found your conscience." He bowed his head, biting his lip to hold back tears. A soft chime echoed from the ceiling speakers, followed by the automated voice of the internal AI system. Executive Audit confirmed. Branch operations under suspension. Access restricted. All the computers across the branch went dark at once, leaving only a single white line in the center of each screen. Access revoked by executive authority. A collective exhale swept through the staff, a strange sound part. Fear part relief. They had just been disconnected, yet somehow freed. Karen rose shakily and walked toward Natalie, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." Natalie didn't step back. She met Karen's eyes. "And that's the problem, Karen. You shouldn't need to know who I am to know how to treat a human being. Karen sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, clutching the edge of the counter, like someone holding on to the last piece of dignity she had left. I didn't mean to. No one ever means to. Natalie replied, her gaze distant. Discrimination rarely begins with intention. It begins with habit. The room fell silent again. Every word she spoke stitched together the torn fabric of humanity in that space. Outside, the faint sound of car horns drifted in. The press hadn't arrived yet, but the story had already escaped the walls. Phones buzzed with alerts. Internal messages flashed across the employees' screens. Head office alert, possible PR crisis. Hold statements. Richard Hayes looked at his phone, his hand trembling. He knew what it meant. Urgent reports, investigations, and possibly termination. He turned back to Natalie, his tone pleading. Ms. Brooks, please give us a chance to make this right. This deal, it could save hundreds of jobs. If you cancel, I'm not cancelling, Natalie said evenly. I'm just not investing in disrespect. Her voice was quiet, but sharper than any accusation. This bank loves to talk about customer trust, but trust doesn't live in advertisements. It lives in how you treat the people you think have no worth. Every word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of silence through the room. Eli looked up, speaking softly, Ms. Brooks, I think we've all learned something today. She glanced at him, a faint, weary smile curving her lips. Eli lessons only matter when people choose to remember them. Then she turned to Richard and David. Gentlemen, remember this. Not every loss can be measured in dollars. A deal might be worth $7 billion, but the honor of an organization, no number can buy that. Karen sobbed loudly, her voice cracking like shattered glass. I'm going to lose my job. Natalie stepped forward, stopping in front of her, her gaze soft but firm. Maybe. But losing a job is easier than losing your character. Start again from there. Her words rippled through the room, breaking the last remnants of arrogance left in the air. There was no more anger now, only the steady glow of truth, the kind that exposes, yet heals. On the large screen, a new message appeared. Incident logged executive review pending. Below it, the timestamp, the location, and 3 names gleamed in white: Richard Hayes, David Rowe, Karen Holt. Each one stared at their own name, seeing a verdict staring back. No judge, no defense. The truth itself was enough to convict. Natalie exhaled softly and turned away. Light from the glass doors reflected off the polished marble, glinting on her shoes, bright clean, untouched by dust. Justice doesn't need to be loud, she said, quietly, almost to herself. It just needs to be seen. She walked toward the exit. People moved aside, silent, afraid even to breathe. Only the wind from the open doors moved, carrying with it the last traces of arrogance from a world that once thought itself untouchable. Outside, the Chicago sky was grey but glowing at the horizon. Natalie paused, catching her reflection in the glass, a woman who had just dismantled an entire system with nothing but composure. Not everyone needs to shout to be heard, she whispered. Sometimes silence does the work. And as she walked away behind her, the glass doors of the bank closed. No typing. No laughter, only the quiet verdict of truth. The glass doors closed behind Natalie Brooks, leaving behind a silence so dense it felt alive, a silence not born of peace, but of the shock that came when the worldview of an entire institution crumbled within minutes. There were no keystrokes, no rhythmic clicks of heels against marble, only the strained breaths of people trying to understand what had just happened. The grand lobby of Harbour First Bank, once a symbol of order and status, now felt like a room after an explosion, the structure intact but its spirit shattered. Karen Holt slumped by the counter, her trembling hands clutching the edges of her vest as tears smeared through her makeup. From someone who had given orders, she had become someone begging to be heard. But there was no one left to listen. The phone on the desk flashed over and over, with alerts from headquarters, executive investigation in progress. HR suspension pending. Each line cut deeper, slicing into the pride she had once lived by. I was just following procedure. She whispered, her voice, the dying breath of an old belief. David Rowe stood behind the counter, pale as paper. He no longer looked like a manager. His tie was crooked, his collar undone, and his eyes were lost in the void, still searching for a way to comprehend the impossible, how the woman they had looked down upon had been their owner all along, and how a single attitude could collapse a billion-dollar empire. Richard Hayes, the branch manager, remained frozen in place. In his hand was the phone that had just gone silent from a call with headquarters. He didn't need to hear the rest. He already knew. He had just lost everything: his position, his reputation, and the trust of the woman he once called a partner. "Just a few minutes," he murmured. "Just a few minutes." But in Natalie Brooks's world, a few minutes were enough for a person to reveal their true worth. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Droplets slid down the tall glass windows, blurring the bank's glowing logo as if even the sky was rewriting its name. In the corner of the room, young intern Eli Turner stood still, eyes sweeping over the room faces, frozen in shock, hands trembling, and he understood. Sometimes silence is a crime. Natalie's words echoed in his mind. No one ever means to. Discrimination doesn't come from intention, it comes from habit. And he realized justice had not arrived to punish, but to reflect. Those condemned were not only Karen or David or Richard, but everyone who had stood silent while the wrong unfolded before them. Eli unlocked his phone and saw the breaking headline on the internal network: "Breaking Brooks Capital, terminate $7 billion merger with Harbour First Bank following discrimination incident." His chest tightened, not from the loss of the deal, but from the realization that the cost of disrespect was sometimes higher than any contract. He took a deep breath and looked at the ID card lying on the counter, the same one that had been thrown to the floor twice. Now it rested neatly, shining a symbol of dignity, reclaimed not through anger, but through truth. Across the room, Karen suddenly stood up, her voice trembling with panic and despair. "It can't end like this. I'll explain. I'll apologize. You'll what?" Holt Richards' voice cut through low and cold. "Apologize to whom she's gone. She doesn't need our apology. The world doesn't either." His words fell like the final blow. Karen froze, then broke down, sobbing. Darryl, the old security guard, watched quietly, his eyes heavier than ever. "I've seen this my whole life," he said softly. "The only difference is this time, people don't get to run from the consequences." A few younger employees teared up. They felt something shift, not just in their workplace, but in how they would see people from this day forward. Outside, under the building's awning, Natalie Brooks stood still. The rain fell gently, the wind brushing through her hair, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of the city. She lifted her phone, the screen lighting up with a call from Amira Stone. Confirmation complete. Amira's voice came through steady and clear. "All data has been archived. The report will be delivered to the board within 2 hours. Good Natalie replied, eyes still fixed on the glass doors she had just walked through. But don't issue a press release yet. Let silence do its job. Amira hesitated. You mean let them realize it on their own? Exactly, Natalie smiled faintly. Not every lesson needs to be shouted. Some lessons only sink in when people hear the echo of their own actions. She looked up. The clouds above began to part, a thin beam of sunlight, piercing through, reflecting off the glass, where the words, "Access revoked," still faintly glowed. Natalie took a deep breath. She wasn't happy, nor angry. She simply felt that the ending was right. Inside, Richard received another message, this time from the corporate CEO. 4 words only, effective immediately terminated. He sank into a chair, letting out a hollow laugh. There was no taste of authority left in it, only the bitter aftertaste of defeat. She was right, he whispered. The system always corrects itself. Karen kept crying. David turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Darryl slowly walked to the counter and picked up the ID card Natalie had left behind. He placed it gently in the center of the bank's logo and said quietly, as if to the room itself, This is the real card." No one answered, but deep down everyone knew this was the verdict. No courtroom, no defense. Just silence. Outside, Natalie walked slowly along the stone path. The black car waited, the driver holding the door open, but she didn't step in immediately. She turned to look back at the grand building, once a monument of power, now just a silent monument of guilt. "I never needed to raise my voice," she whispered, "because justice doesn't need defenders. It only needs someone willing to stand still." She entered the car and closed the door. The vehicle glided away through the drizzle, leaving behind a motionless building where those who once sneered now looked at each other, realizing they had just been judged without a single gavel being struck. The verdict of Natalie Brooks wasn't written on paper or sealed with a stamp. It was written in every lowered gaze, every tear of regret, and every heart relearning how to beat with humanity. And across the noisy city of Chicago, a silence spread, heavy but fair. A silence that spoke, a verdict that needed no court. Along Michigan Avenue, the black car glided forward, leaving behind the buildings that reflected the fading light of the afternoon. Inside the cabin, Natalie Brooks sat in silence. There was no sound except the soft rush of wind against the windows. She looked down at her phone screen. A message from Amira appeared. The termination agreement has been sent. The media has started reporting. The impact is spreading quickly. Natalie turned off the screen. She didn't smile. There was no joy of victory, only a quiet emptiness, the kind that follows after justice has been served, when one realizes that winning does not erase pain, it merely makes the world see it. Outside, the Chicago sky had turned golden sunlight, weaving through the tall glass towers, scattering into thousands of glimmers, as if the city itself were bearing witness to an awakening. Natalie leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw the image of the ID card hitting the marble floor, the look of disdain, and the silence that surrounded her. Then she saw another image, Eli, the young intern, trembling yet brave enough to speak the truth. And she knew it was people like him who would rewrite the future. Justice isn't always victory, she thought. Sometimes it's simply the moment someone looks into a mirror and no longer recognizes who they were. She opened her eyes again, her gaze steadier now. There was no anger, no pride, only clarity. Far behind her in the Harbor First building, the office lights were going out one by one. The people who had laughed were now packing their things. The The keyboards that once clicked coldly now sat still under dim light. On the counter, the ID card that Darryl had placed remained untouched, a symbol of a lesson the entire financial world would remember for years to come. Natalie's car stopped at an intersection. In front of her, the traffic light turned from red to green, a simple signal, yet one that carried meaning. She whispered softly to herself, "Time to move forward." The green light reflected gently across her face, calm, yet powerful. In that moment, Natalie Brooks was no longer just the chief executive officer of a corporation, but the face of a new era, an era where justice no longer needed to shout to be heard, and dignity no longer needed permission to shine. She turned toward a mirror, her voice calm but resonant. "When the world is loud over the trivial, be the one who makes it silent for the truth." The car began to move again, blending into the flow of the city. Behind them, the last light of day melted into the streets, leaving behind a radiant evening where silence had become the strongest voice of justice. 2 days later, the morning news on every financial network began with the same headline: Brooks Capital withdraws from $7 billion deal when business ethics become the new standard. From Chicago to New York, from high-rise financial offices to small coffee shops, the story spread like wildfire, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. People were not only talking about the downfall of Harbor First Bank, but about the woman who had made an entire system stop and look at itself with silence. In the high-rise office of Brooks Capital, Natalie Brooks sat by the window, gazing down at the city glowing beneath the night sky. On her desk, the ID card, the symbol of that day, rested neatly inside a dark wooden frame. It wasn't displayed for pride, but as a reminder, even the smallest moment can shape history when it is built on dignity. Amira Stone entered, placing a new folder on the desk. "The company has received over 1,000 emails from bank employees," she said, saying, "They've changed how they treat customers after watching the video. Would you like to make a public statement?" Natalie smiled, her expression gentle yet firm. "No, I don't need to say more. Real change doesn't come from speeches. It comes from the actions people take once they finally understand." She stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the headlights stretched across the streets like glowing veins, connecting people between untold stories, between unbroken biases. "I only want one thing," she said softly, "that every person who walks into any place, whether a bank or a small diner, is seen as human, nothing more, nothing less." Amira nodded, her eyes glistening. "The world needs more people like you, Natalie." Natalie turned, her smile faint but warm. "No, Amira. The world just needs better people." The final scene closed with Natalie leaving her office, the light behind her reflecting off the glass wall, where 3 words were etched faintly into the surface: integrity, humanity, respect. The narrator's voice rose, slow, deep, filled with emotion. In a world where the voice of power so often drowns out the voice of what is right, there are those who choose silence, not because they are weak, but because they understand that true justice does not need to shout to be heard. Because when you hold on to your dignity, you do more than save yourself. You make the world reconsider how it treats humanity. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving only the soft glow of the city lights, and one final line appeared. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands, and the world bows. From the perspective of an expert in leadership ethics and corporate culture, the story of Natalie Brooks is not merely a banking incident, but a test of human nature in the modern world, where power and success often blur the lines of respect. When everything fell silent, her actions became the loudest voice, reminding us that dignity is not something to demand. It is something we preserve even when others forget. True justice doesn't need a stage. It only needs someone calm enough to stand firm and let the truth speak for itself. If you believe that respect is the foundation of every lasting success like this video, to share that message, subscribe to join the journeys where integrity shines through power, and comment the phrase that reflects your belief. Hold your dignity.